Welcome to Transitions. I'm your host, Antoinette Zloty. I have a very interesting lady for you to meet today. Her name is Alexandra Baylis, and she has come a long way across Canada and now is living here in Winnipeg, Manitoba. Today we're talking about brain, and we're talking about brain injury, and we're talking about Manitoba Brain Injury Association. It is very important that we take a look at our treasures, because so many of us have material possessions that we regard as treasures. And how well are we looking after our brains? Are you really listing them among your treasures? So we're going to talk about some personal experience as well as the work that Alexandra is doing as Executive Director for MBIA. So welcome.
Thank you very much. So I'd like to start by telling a personal story. I'm a mom. My son is now 31, but in his late teens, he became addicted to crystal meth. And one of the ways that you can acquire a brain injury is through drug use and drug abuse. And crystal meth is one of those drugs which permanently rewires the brain. So the brain is never the same even once a person stops using. And I must say my son has been clean for 3 years. But a lot of his behavior and thinking and coping strategies are still those from the time when he was addicted. So it's been very challenging. He's very quick to anger, has trouble with problem-solving skills, has problems thinking about the future and the consequences of his actions. But I've been really grateful for some very good friends who paved the way to help me understand my son, because their son had a brain injury as well. In his case, Clayton was in an ATV accident when he was just 14 years old back in 1997. And his mom and I have been friends most of our lives. And Myra got connected with MBIA back in the late 90s. And so I've been hearing about the Manitoba Brain Injury Association for a long time, and how they helped my friend's family through tough times. My friend Clayton was in a coma for 2 months and had to learn everything all over again. And of course at 14, he's just starting high school. He still finished grade 9 on time that year with good marks. But he did have permanent deficits. His permanent deficits were loss of vision in part of each eye, some mobility issues, and all those executive brain function issues, the things that our frontal lobe helps us do, like impulse control and problem solving and thinking through consequences, the same way my son eventually ended up because of crystal meth use. So walking with Clayton on his journey actually in many ways prepared me to walk on the journey with my son many years later. And I'm so grateful to my friend Myra and her family for, allowing me to be part of Clayton's life, but also for their support through the years that I had to support my son in addiction.
So we don't know what's ahead for us and what we will have to do within our own families. So learning from others is very important, because it did help you with that transition, seeing your son functioning in one way and then he's functioning in another.
Absolutely, relationships are really key.
Yeah.
I mean, as a society, we were created to be in relationship with each other. And I am very fond of asking people their story. And often those stories, they stay with me. And those stories have led me to becoming a social worker, for one thing, because I wanted to make a difference in people's lives. I wanted to be a helper. I wanted to be an agent of change. And eventually I got my master's in social work and focused on community development, because I wanted to make change on a large scale.
A large scale, yeah. So, but the thing is that a lot of young people aren't aware of the consequences of taking certain actions in the now and how it can change their lives not really for the better. I mean, your son was fortunate to have a mom like you, and not everybody has a mom who is well educated or knowledgeable about how to support people whose brain has been altered by physical substances and so on. So it is really interesting that you were able to still hang in there, though. And do you think that there are people out there who are trying to get across to their kids, don't do this because you are going to affect yourself down the way? You might feel pleasure now from getting involved with these substances, but your treasure, your brain, your functioning is going to be seriously altered. Like,
I think it's one of the most difficult things as a parent, because of course, especially with teenagers, because their brain is still developing, they often think they're invincible, right? And we've all heard the adage, if all your friends jump off the cliff, are you going to jump off the cliff? And the kids say yes, but because they're followers at that age. So actually, one of the programs that the Manitoba Brain Injury Association offers across the province of Manitoba is a program actually aimed at teenagers. It's called the PARTY program, which stands for Prevention of Alcohol and Related Trauma in Youth. And it was designed at Sunnybrook Hospital and is being facilitated in high schools all across Canada. And it is very insightful for the youth, because often we bring in families and people with lived experience of brain injury to share their story, so that the youth are seeing firsthand, what does this look like? How is a person changed? Some brain injuries are very minor, some are much more severe, and people lose mobility, they lose the ability to care for themselves and do their activities of daily living. Some lose their speech, some their hearing, some their vision. But one of the things that is often common is that loss of executive brain function and that ability to plan and think and remember. I mean, even myself, I have a severe mental illness, and I brought my day timer today because I have some short-term memory problems, and all my clients at MBIA say, you're just like us, you carry a notebook everywhere. And it's created like a common bond, that we have a common experience about taking notes to help us get through our day and our week and remember all the important things. Sometimes I'm grateful for my own personal challenges as a human being, but also those of my son and my friends, because they've helped me to be more compassionate and more caring. And as we work with youth through the PARTY program, that's part of what we're trying to do as well. And then we have another program for youth. We do a mock car crash every year which is about alcohol-related drinking or distracted driving, and there's an accident, and then all the emergency services that have to come, and the youth participate in this process. And we take it all the way through from the choices before, the driving, the accident, the potential injuries, right to death, and there's a funeral. So it's really powerful and impactful on the youth to see that consequence of events, from that one choice to have a drink or to pick up their phone when they're driving and text, that all these things can happen.
And I guess I'd like to comment on a couple of things. One of them is that with regard to the notebooks, I love using a notebook as well. And I actually find that with the various projects that I've been involved in as a retired social worker, that having that notebook, putting the date on the top, who I spoke with, and so on, helps me a lot, because a few days later, I'm going back now, what did we discuss? What was I supposed to do here? And instead of having a lot of different pieces of paper, so it's a very good and a very functional thing to use. And I would really recommend that to everyone. Now, with regard to children, teenagers drinking and so on, I wonder about dry grad parties. You know, why not really start something going on that? Because in the past, like before the pandemic especially, that was the big time that a lot of people would figure their age, of that age, that they could just go out and really get smashed. And the other kids who aren't interested can actually be slighted, or, you know, other people not as keen to associate with them because maybe they're not cool. But I think that that is something that maybe some of the school divisions should consider going to dry grads, because it would really, I think, putting that sanction that it's okay to not have that drink is really important. And now a lot of the research is showing that the strokes of the past, a lot of them, the cancers of the past, could have been maybe prevented had people been more careful about the consumption of alcohol. But there are a lot of other things too involved, right, with brain injury, like the stigma that we don't want people to feel badly about going for help. You know, you're not there, right? Your organization isn't there to make people feel badly.
No, we're not there to pass judgment.
Pass judgment.
But by the grace of God, we could all be someone who needs support.
Yeah.
And of course, the brain injury, there's also an overlap with mental health issues as well, and physical health. So one of the things we're very good at the Brain Injury Association is running support groups. And one of the things COVID did was help us take our support groups virtual, so that anyone across the province of Manitoba can connect during a weekly support group or a monthly support group.
That's good.
And we have right now physical support groups meeting not just in Winnipeg, but in Brandon and Selkirk as well. And we're hoping in the coming year to expand into Dauphin and Swan River as well. And of course, long term, we'd love to see more support groups in the north as well. Certainly, alcohol and drugs contribute to brain injury. And we need to talk more about brain health. How do we prevent the injuries, right? I mean, one of the things we know now that marijuana has been legalized is there's a lot more use amongst youth. And yet research tells us that the brain really doesn't finish developing until their late 20s. And so it's going to be another generation before we can really see what are the effects of easy access to things like marijuana, or drinking at grad parties, because sometimes the youth aren't even 18 yet, to tell us what are the long-lasting effects of numbing our brains with drugs like marijuana.
So do we need to then look at encouraging people to see their brains as needing protection from external substances that can harm it? Like you'd never take your hand and put your hand in a flame,
No.
right? But yet that drink or that drug or what have you.
Or using that cell phone when you're driving. No, they're not thinking.
They're not thinking about the fact that you could still survive, but you can survive with impairment.
Impairments.
And so some of the things that you love to do,
you might not be able to do
affected.
anymore.
Right, you can't do that anymore.
No, it's the same thing with wearing a helmet. It's something that people of any age can do, whether you're skating or tobogganing. People who don't wear helmets when they're tobogganing, and yes, it's very, very dangerous.
Yes.
And moms and dads need to wear those helmets, not just the kids. When you're skating, when you're playing sports, concussion is a real risk, right? We call those minor brain injuries. But a concussion, a serious concussion can have lifelong effects. Often from a concussion injury, for part of the healing, you have to stay off screens. And our whole society is addicted to our cell phones and televisions and computer monitors. Imagine the treatment being you must stay off screens for 6 weeks, how difficult that is. And, because that affects people's schooling, their work, their personal lives, their entertainment. And yet that is one of the recommendations is to limit screen time if you have a concussion. Brain injuries can also happen from accidents that are through no fault, that aren't related to drugs or drinking or distracted driving. On my way to the studio tonight, there was a bad car accident, and it delayed me getting here a bit. I hope the people are okay, because it certainly is life-altering to be in a car accident. Aneurysm, stroke are also forms of brain injury. Now, they have an internal reason why they happen instead of an external reason, but they are still brain injuries. And there's a huge growing body of research right now about the link between interpersonal violence and brain trauma. Now, I recently read an article from the Globe and Mail that quoted research saying that there are 4,500 women with brain trauma from interpersonal violence to every NHL hockey player with a concussion injury. So it's a huge area that we need to be talking more about.
Yeah, I was reading a little bit about that too, and that some women are surviving these trauma that are mostly women.
Yeah.
I mean, some men go through trauma as well, but mostly women who have been actually survived strangulation. And then their lives are changed forever. Sometimes they can't even go back to communities that they had lived in because the communities do not have certain supports that they need.
They don't have certain supports, or sometimes in small communities, and I grew up in the north, is sometimes the community chooses to side with the abuser. And it's not safe for the woman who's been abused to go home. It's very, very difficult. And one of the things we know is that a lot of this brain injury from interpersonal violence is being missed. Because they may have gone into a hospital because of a sexual assault or a broken bone, and we're missing asking, was your head involved? And yet, I've worked in a shelter myself in the past. You see women with those executive brain function difficulties and following a routine for their children, following a routine for themselves, showing up for appointments. And maybe we need to start asking the question, was your brain hurt? Did you sustain any kind of head trauma? So that we can understand what supports we need to put in place for women. So that's part of what we want to do at Manitoba Brain Injury Association as well, is we want to be seen as the source of good information to increase the awareness of every citizen in Manitoba about different scenarios that can lead to brain injury. And we work together with the Brain Injury Canada, who is building a clearinghouse of resources that everyone will soon be able to access, so that, that there's consistency in prevention education across the country. We've been fortunate as well to work with a lot of researchers who are looking into developing different programs and different ways of preventing brain injury as well. So that's kind of exciting, because the social worker in me loves doing the research part and learning new ways to help people.
And when kids are in care and they have brain injury, either happening in care or that led to them being in care, that's another challenge there in the system, because a lot of people are so used to dealing with children who present in a certain way, what they consider to be the norm, but then if there are behavioral issues that come up, then you're into a higher cost situation that's needed by governments to make sure that these kids get the attention at the right time and in the right place. So is there some advocacy that goes on too for, especially given that they're young, brain still developing, try to get at them earlier?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
We try to connect with many different social service and healthcare organizations to provide training. In terms of advocacy work, we do advocacy for individuals, but I'm actually going to school right now myself to learn more skills about advocacy in terms of changing public policy so that we can have systems in place, whether it's in CFS or in the hospital or in your family doctor's office or in your school, so that people are more aware and are recognizing that maybe that behavior isn't because the child's tired, isn't because they are wanting to be bad. Maybe there's an organic reason, and that's their brain has been hurt. And how do we identify that and put the supports in place without labeling the child as being a behavior problem or being bad or having a deficit? This is a child with an injury. How do we help them heal?
And I think that any improvements, in the system would go a long way for these children, and also improvements for people in relationships, improvements for people who are older and are experiencing some organic changes too, in terms of their brain. And so the future, what do you think the future is going to look like? Because one of the things I want to ask you, what you think about this, is that what would you think about more involvement of culturally based organizations? Because I've found, as a retired social worker, that there really could be a lot more tapping into culturally based organizations by government beyond just things like Folklorama and the cultural niceties of the dance and the food and the singing and music. That's all very good, but I think pulling in these nonprofits into the mix in terms of delivery of healthcare supports is very important, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely. We live in a very multicultural society.
Yeah.
We live not just with new immigrants coming to Canada, but of course our First Nations people who've been here for a long time. Even myself being of settler descent, I have a diverse European background with very different cultures and different languages. And we need to tap into that. And diversity, equity, and inclusion are really important right now, along with truth and reconciliation. And how do we work together? Because every cultural group has their own stories and their own expertise. And we need to lean on each other. That's part of what it means to be community, is how do we grow together? I recently read an article about a mom who was Sikh, and about helmets not fitting her male children.
Oh, I saw that.
And so she invented a helmet that had room for hair. And I thought, how creative was that? And if it hadn't been from someone from another culture, we're looking at prevention of brain injury, those helmets would have never come about. And how often is innovation missed because we only look at the same players to do the innovation, and yet everyone has creativity in them and can contribute to solving difficult problems to create solutions.
Well, it's interesting to seeing things come into the market that are really meeting a need, such as those helmets. I was very happy to see that. And I was happy recently to be a part of development of a mental health toolkit for Black Canadians. And some people would say, oh, well, mental health is not just for Black people, it's for everybody. And it is, but we are diverse within diversity. Well, we all come from different ways of thinking about mental health, and we all also come from different levels of understanding of how to access service out there and that it's available to be accessed. Or so I think that having that toolkit and also having other groups get involved, they become educated too. Because if they are also going to talk about, okay, you know, maybe corporal punishment, for instance, or other people and how you talk to or how you treat each other, that isn't good in the long run for individuals. It's better to help protect them because you love certain things about that person. You're not going to keep getting that. Right? If you hurt that person physically, like as in the case of partner violence, let's say, you hurt that person, your children, their parents, all these other people that love that person are going to be affected by your actions. So the more that we can get and the more information that we can provide in society through our cultural groups and so on, the better. And I'm so glad that you were able to join us today because I just wonder, was there one more thing that you'd like to say before we wrap?
Well, I want to encourage everyone to protect their brain. Protect your brain. Wear a helmet when you're especially doing winter sports.
Yeah.
Don't do distracted driving, texting and driving. I see people all the time in traffic. And be kind and gentle with yourself if you do have a brain injury.
Thank you so much for joining us. And Alexandra, I am so glad that I've met you through the show. And I would like to encourage our viewers to please go online, go on YouTube, and look for our show, Transitions, on Shaw Spotlight, and check out some of the different episodes that we've shot and that you might be interested in.